Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at Call of Duty Black Ops 7 and specifically the early access of our beta here using the RX 9070 XT. We're using the ASRock Steel Legend version of the card. Of course, it has 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 video memory. We are playing on the latest AMD drivers and pairing with the 9800 X3D as well as 64 gigabytes of DDR5. Let's jump in. All right, so this is going to be my first experience with Black Ops 7. I actually haven't even jumped into a game whatsoever here. Now, I will also mention before we get started, this is a beta, but if you're, have been around and played through some of these Call of Duty betas, the betas really are basically the full game. They change very, in some very minor aspects between the beta and full release. It's essentially going to be a finished product. So we're starting off here at 1080p. All this looks good. Okay, as far as our graphics presets, we are going to start off here at extreme. So this is our maxed out setting here. Now we do have FSR 4, which is really nice that it comes baked in with FSR 4. Call of Duty typically does a pretty good job of having a ton of really great options when it comes to upscaling. So it is nice that FSR 4 is here. As far as our FSR preset, I'm going to use FSR as our anti-aliasing solution. So no sort of upscaling to begin with here. So just complete max settings. Just want to double check there's nothing I'm missing. And really the only setting that I want to make sure I change, go ahead and apply these. The other thing I really love about Call of Duty is they added how you can like search through settings. That's been in the game for a while. So if we're looking for like blur, we can actually just come in here. Okay, motion blur is already turned off. So let's go ahead, check it out. Again, this is 1080p. This is a competitive game, so it's certainly important that you are getting, high frames, or at least high enough frames to be competitive here. So let's check out what max settings native FSR looks like. All right, so jumping in here again, this is at 1080p, so our resolution here is certainly, not necessarily the highest, but this is the best possible graphics and anti-aliasing options that you could ask for when it comes to, just the actual quality of the image. So it's definitely nice to see that we are right off the bat. I'm kind of interested here. I think there's like wall running and stuff in this game now. But this is definitely a really great looking picture, and it is nice to see that, we can come in here, play at 1080p, which of course, is not a super, high resolution or anything like that, but we can come in here and play and just crank all the settings, and we are getting a competitive FPS. Now, especially in a game like Call of Duty, this is certainly where, many people would be totally happy trading off some of those, graphics for some better, FPS. That's certainly understandable. This is definitely not a game where you are going to be prioritizing the look of the game over just, your competitive advantage, especially considering the high TTK, or low time to kill, I should say, rather than high. But in general here, you can see the game actually looks pretty good, just as far as the game definitely has kind of, as far as Call of Duties go, definitely has more of like the cartoony type art style with like very bright, vibrant colors. Typical for, some Black Ops titles. And our 1% lows look great. 108 FPS on 1% lows, 158 on our average. And using just over 13 gigabytes of video memory, which is actually pretty high for 1080p. But in general here, handling it just fine. Now, of course, what we could do, say we wanted to stick with these high presets, is we can, especially given the fact that we have FSR 4, so we can switch off of native and go for quality. We could also go even as low as like balanced for our upscaling. However, given the fact that we are at 1080p, even on FSR 4, the fact that we have a machine learning upscaling technology, still, just due to the fact that our resolution is not very high at 1080p, these upscaling options, I wouldn't be super aggressive with them. They're going to look better than if we were on FSR 4, but in general, you probably don't want to go much lower at 1080p, much lower than maybe a balanced preset. You can see that it does seem that this is now kind of becoming a bit more reliant on our CPU at this point, seeing much higher CPU usage, and our GPU usage is kind of fluctuating. But this does give us a pretty considerable increase in our FPS, where we were around 150. Now we're seeing just under 200 FPS on our average here. Game feels silky smooth. We also did get a a pretty significant bump to our 1% lows, now seeing all the way up to 130 FPS for our 1% lows. So, you know, this game and this game engine has been around a long time. It's a very mature game engine, and it is nice to see that, you know, it is performing to our standards as far as what you would expect for kind of a, you know, competitive shooter. And I want to give it the chance to load in new settings, so I don't want to change our graphics preset, but let's just go down to balanced here. Now I do expect this will certainly put us into a CPU bound scenario. Maybe not so much actually. So down at balanced here, I will say the image does look quite a bit softer, certainly softer than our native option, and maybe only slightly softer than quality. It kind of, you know, moves down ever so slightly. It's not like super noticeable, these bumps here. So we are getting a slight FPS improvement where we were seeing just under 200 FPS. Now we're seeing just over 200 FPS for our average here. So, you know, if you wanted to play at 1080p, you had 9070 XT, you wanted the best possible, you know, graphics preset, but you were okay with using that FSR technology, this is an option for you. You can get 200 plus FPS with this pairing here at 1080p and get, you know, pretty solid results. All right, so going here back to our native resolution, when I do any tests here on like competitive type games, I always get the same kind of comments where people say, why are you playing on max settings? No one plays Call of Duty on max settings. You want more FPS. It's a valid complaint and a valid criticism. So I am going to focus here now on 1080p, and we're going to go for the basic preset. So this is if, you know, you don't care about flashy graphics, you just want to play it native and you want good FPS. So basic here, the only thing lower than this is minimum. Now for minimum, this does have obviously some other negative effects such as texture quality, things like that. So basic, in my opinion, for most games, and I will just jump in and test the minimum setting also just to see how it looks. But I imagine typically, from my experience, one up from kind of the lowest is typically what kind of still makes the game look okay, but not really taxing the card too much. So this is now at our basic preset native resolution. So here, still at native resolution, remember this is where we're getting right about 150 FPS at our extreme settings. You can see, you know, the game still looks good. It still looks super smooth. It still looks like the same Call of Duty that we were playing before. But now we're getting essentially a 100 FPS increase. And what's probably more significant than just the average increase is the increase to our 1% lows. Where we were seeing around 100 FPS for our 1% lows, now we are seeing 183 for our 1% lows, looks like, with a really, really flat frame time graph. So this is definitely a more competitive way to play. You're still getting, you know, really sharp, clear image, given the fact that we are playing at our native 1080p resolution, but we're kind of achieving that additional FPS in a bit more of a way that's not so much, you know, it's not so much like compromising our actual image quality. So definitely, you know, I understand people wanting to just, rather than mess with any sort of upscaling, rather just go for lower preset. And here, part of the benefit is certainly the fact that we are kind of pairing with a bit of an overpowered processor, kind of enabling us to get these high frames. But, you know, it does go to show just bumping down some settings here does actually have a pretty significant increase all the way up to 240, looks like, on our average. A pretty significant increase, and especially if you're on a very high refresh, you know, 1080p display, something like a 360 hertz monitor, something like that, you will certainly notice, even if you don't notice necessarily, even if you don't necessarily notice the FPS increase, like, you know, all the way up to 240 FPS. It is also much, much more responsive when you go all the way up. You know, 100 plus FPS is certainly very, very noticeable as far as, you know, just the snappiness, and also the increase to our 1% lows, and just how flat that frame time graph has become is incredibly noticeable just in, you know, even just jumping in here and playing a little bit. First person shooter game like this, really, really, really noticeable and really great experience. Now, if you want a bit more, let's just crank down. We don't want to go too far. We'll just come down to quality here and see if this gives us any sort of meaningful gain, and it does seem like bumping down to quality does give us a slight gain. I wouldn't say it's necessarily super meaningful, but it is certainly a slight gain here. And really, when we're talking about quality versus native, when we're using FSR 4, it is noticeable. I will say native is quite a bit sharper and does result in a little bit clearer of an image, but it's not like super noticeable. I'd probably just leave it on native in this particular instance. I think the trade-off in picture quality is not worth just the minor 10 FPS increase in this particular instance. But if you did want a bit more, you certainly could do this. And even though this isn't something I would do, just to see what we can see here, if we just went for ultra performance here, you can just see that it does seem that 250 FPS, even at ultra performance, is not really resulting in a increase really whatsoever. Maybe like still that 10 FPS increase here. Actually, it looks like for some reason, we are locked to 250 FPS. So let me just double check that there isn't some sort of limit in place that we need to disable. Oh, and there is actually a 200 FPS limit here. So I can just set this to unlimited now, and we'll see if we are getting a higher FPS. So, okay. Scratch what I said before. If you unlimit your FPS, you do actually get a pretty significant increase. So I guess, if you were someone who just, had a 360 hertz monitor here and wanted to just play at, max possible settings, ultra performance here at the basic preset does give you a pretty significant boost again here. So I guess now that we are seeing that increase, I should just make sure I double back and make sure we weren't getting higher than what I thought we were. So remember, we were getting right around 240 using the quality preset. So let's go back, re-enable that quality preset, and just make sure, yeah, we actually were getting quite a bit in terms of our limited. So here at quality is another way to actually achieve a pretty substantial increase to our performance here. So now we are seeing around 315 FPS, and in fact, may as well just due to the fact that I was not testing that properly. My apologies. But if we do just go back to native, let's just make sure that was in fact right around 240, and yeah, it seems that it was still right around 240 for native. So in general here, basic is definitely another really great option if you are just looking for, good FPS, don't really care all that much about, as far as like our graphics presets. And again, the game, Black Ops in particular, as far as the Call of Duty series goes, kind of angles more for that cartoony art style. So a lot of the stuff, even like you can see like the texture on our guy's hand is very, very dull. But as far as like looking out of place, it doesn't look nearly as out of place. Some stuff, if I slow down and look at it, like the texture on our gun, some surfaces like on the ground, or even those steps you saw there, certainly if we slow down and look at it, texture quality, shadow quality, it does take a pretty significant hit. But as far as just, running around and playing the game, you're still going to get pretty solid visuals. And, if you're looking for a competitive experience, you certainly can achieve that and quite a bit more here on the 9070 XT. And just to be thorough here, we'll go ahead, we'll leave it on native. And now let's go for that minimum preset. So where we were getting around 250 FPS, let's see if that minimum, both how does it look and how much of an FPS increase do we actually get for going for those lowest possible settings. And bumping down here to minimum, you can see it doesn't actually change our FPS all that much. We're playing here at native resolution. Now, where we were kind of seeing closer to like 240, 250, we are at times kind of seeing a bit more, but in general, not a huge difference as far as our FPS, but also not a huge difference as far as our visual quality. Still kind of the same general experience that you're going to be getting here, where, you're still getting, these pretty dumbed down visuals, but it's just really, to each their own whether or not this is really going to impact your enjoyment of the game. If you're just looking for a competitive experience here, then yeah, I'd say just throw it on minimum. You're still going to, get a generally pretty decent looking game, and you can come in here and at least with the 9800X3D 9070 XT combo still get really, really solid performance here. So of course we can now, if we want to, come in and say you just wanted maximum possible performance. So we're already on minimum, So we may as well go ahead, throw on ultra performance. Whoops, not that one. So ultra performance FSR, and now this does see our FPS skyrocket. And now we are certainly in a place where we are seeing a CPU bound scenario at times. You can see our GPU is hovering like right around 96, 98, at times going into the low 80s even. And we are seeing definitely a increase in our performance due to this. So getting around 300 FPS here. Now there will be some variance, as you can see. Of course, we're on a different map than we were on our previous testing, but in general, still getting really solid performance. So certainly can play this game, bump down everything to low, turn on some FSR, and the FSR 4 does look pretty solid. So there's certainly quite a few options for you to choose from if you are just kind of looking for a completely, competitive type experience. All right, now moving up to 1440p and playing on the max settings here, extreme settings at native FSR 4. All right, so starting off here, you can see, I kind of have like a loose goal when I'm talking about competitive games as 120 FPS being our competitive area. Now in Call of Duty, a game like Call of Duty, game that people play, ultra competitively and really care about performing well in, there are certainly cases to be made for, even 120 FPS not being enough. So, to each their own, but it is nice to see, I will say, that we can play here at 1440p max settings without the use of any sort of upscaling, and not only no upscaling, but a really expensive form of anti-aliasing, and get essentially a competitive looking experience here. So right around, right around that 120 FPS mark that I kind of, again, just kind of loosely like to target for myself. Game looks great, and the image looks really sharp. FSR 4 at native is an incredibly sharp looking image, I will say. So while upscaling is nice, and certainly having advanced upscaling is very nice, and a machine learning technology that is able to use upscaling and give us a good looking picture, there is something to be said for just a native looking image, absolutely no upscaling, using the same resolution as your monitor and outputting a really crystal clear and sharp looking image, which we are able to do here, getting right around 120 FPS. Acceptable 1% lows at 85, feels very smooth, no major stuttering or anything like that. Now of course, given the fact that we have FSR 4, kind of not great reason not to use it, especially now that we are on FSR 4. So switching over to Balanced here does give us another significant FPS increase. So now we are certainly well above that 120 FPS mark. That, again, there's no real reason why I'm saying 120 FPS. I guess I kind of just loosely think of that as being competitive, given the fact that, a lot of TVs, 4K TVs, and just generally console players kind of have 120 FPS a lot of times as their performance mode in competitive games. So it's just kind of typically what I like to kind of call competitive. But really, I'm aware that, a lot of PC gamers certainly are used to, competitive meaning far more than 120 FPS. But here we're seeing around 190 FPS on our average, with really respectful over 100 even on our 1% lows. So certainly really solid performance here. And as far as our picture quality goes, again, the FSR 4 nature of our anti-aliasing and upscaling option here is resulting in a really great looking picture. So typically the higher your resolution goes, so now that we're at 1440p, that upscaling looks better and better, and it's less and less noticeable, and that certainly seems to be the case here. Really looks like essentially native, and this is even down on Balance, not even on our quality preset. So if you were happy with the performance as is and just want a bit more, you could go for quality, or you can even bump down further and go for something like performance or ultra performance and get some pretty great results. So because we're at 1440p, we may as well, let's just go all the way down to ultra performance, and we'll have to check this out in the next game. So here at ultra performance, now while ultra performance does look a lot better at 1440p compared to 1080p, it still, in my opinion, is a little too aggressive for upscaling more than I would personally like to use. But hey, this is a way if you just wanted, max possible settings here, and we are still operating from that, extreme super high level preset here, is another way to stay on those max settings, and maybe you're not as, prone to noticing some of like the weird blurriness or visual artifacts when it comes to some aggressive upscaling. This is another way to kind of come in and get a very, very high FPS, 230 on our average here, and not have to compromise at all when it comes to any of our actual graphics settings. So certainly an option here, just not really one that I would personally recommend. So really what I would personally go for and recommend going for is, rather than using super aggressive upscaling, I would just go for a lower graphics preset. So let's actually just bump all the way down to minimum. Again, this is what people always tell me in my comments they want to see, competitive like game like this, just going for minimum here. And as far as our upscaling, just going for native resolution. So this is going to result in a really clear looking image. It's just our graphics preset that's going to be changing here. So going for minimum, native, FSR 4. All right, so here now on that minimum preset, and this is a native resolution, and not only a native resolution, but using that FSR 4 for our anti-aliasing. So it is a very, intensive, a very, expensive form of anti-aliasing, and certainly, not an easy thing to run all the time, and does result in a really clear looking image. Now, I will say, my opinion, some of this stuff I will say does kind of bother me personally. Like, just look at our iron sights here, just how terrible they look. So, obviously there are benefits to this. The fact that, we're using such a little video memory, only using about 6 gigabytes of video memory. Not super surprising given our textures are obviously so low resolution. But I do think we could probably get a good bit of the way here without sacrificing so much when it comes to our actual visuals. I am aware that, some people, it's not just about the visuals. Some people actually like the look and feel of these like lower res textures. Makes things easier to spot, to point out. And, I can certainly appreciate that and understand, someone who is just looking for an incredibly competitive experience, doesn't really care about any of like the flourishes when it comes to, good looking visuals, just kind of going for a super minimal type experience. I can certainly see the appeal here. And this is certainly a way to get much, much higher FPS. You can see, 170 for our FPS as far as our average, with 111 in our lows at 1440p native, and it is resulting in a very, very sharp looking picture. So certainly benefits to going for these particular options. But in my opinion, there's just a little bit, too many drawbacks just when it comes to how ugly certain things look, especially a game like Call of Duty where, you're running around. Honestly, playing here, I'm not really like noticing moment to moment that our visuals are so bad, but in those moments where you do slow down, bring your gun up, you see how ugly things look. Or if you were, say you're prone next to something and you just see how dull and low res all these textures are, I do think that it does look a little bit nasty, but you certainly can play here. These are very, very competitive settings, and we are, being rewarded with these settings, getting a much higher FPS. So certainly are benefits here. And again, that's averaging out to around 170 FPS on our average with 113, 1% lows. And we could, of course, push this a little bit further using that upscaling. So rather going for native, even just doing something like going for balanced here. This is a way to get, a little bit more here. Now seeing 200s in our 230 at times. Like, this is very, very high FPS, and playing at 1440p and using FSR 4, it does result in a really, really good looking image. It doesn't really look too far off of native at all. It looks very, very strong. So this is definitely another, method if you were kind of wanting to. So I'm being hunted by these drones. Again, I'm playing this game for the complete first time doing this benchmark, so I'm sure I'm kind of not the most engaging gameplay, but this is a way to get a bit more. And honestly, if you were to be the type of person, say I just want to go, I don't really care about visuals, I have a 1440p monitor, you may as well throw on upscaling, because honestly the upscaling nature of even just playing it balanced is still really, really solid. This minimum preset to me is just a little bit too far. I mean, like, everywhere you look there's like just issues and kind of ugliness. Like even these shadows, like, look how crazy this looks. This looks like this would be like some sort of fringe ceiling. But no, it's just a flat edge that you know, the actual shadow quality is rendering it in this way. So you're definitely going to be sacrificing quite a bit for going for this this minimum preset here. So I'll try to just change this on the fly. Hopefully it takes effect. So if we did just go for balanced here, so this is rather than using such aggressive form of, you know, just dropping down our presets, we can go for balanced here, and you can see, you know, if we bring up our gun, does look a little bit better. Let's go see if we can find maybe a shadow to see if, you know, the shadows are rendering a bit better. Again, I didn't reload the game, so maybe it'd be worth, you know, jumping back in to get an actual real significant benchmark here. And actually the shadow looks the same here, so it looks like some of these settings did not take effect. So let's actually go back and reload and see if, you know, it does look any different. So again, this is balanced preset now, and let's actually go and we'll stick here actually with FSR at balanced as well. So hoping that this kind of is a better middle ground of getting high FPS while not sacrificing so much. So loading in here now, remember we're on that balanced preset, and we are using balanced upscaling. And honestly, I don't know, maybe there isn't a good reason to go away from minimum, because even balanced here looks pretty crazy. I mean, look at our own shadow here, still like incredibly pixelated. Now, our gun, still same thing, looks very, very blurry here. So, you know, I don't know where I land on this. I mean, if you're going for just, you know, you don't care about visuals, you know, you probably don't even care that, you know, are you slowing down to look at a shadow, something like that? Probably not. And just playing the game, you know, running around, trying to get, you know, eliminations, trying to perform well, it's not really going to matter, you know, the quality of shadows if we're just kind of jumping in here and playing. And maybe the increase in FPS is worth it. Certainly the feedback that I've gotten from, you know, anytime I benchmark like a competitive type game, whether that's Fortnite, Marvel Rivals, whatever the case may be. And I imagine, you know, Call of Duty players are probably in the same boat of just, you know, wanting maximum possible FPS. So certainly is an option coming in here in balanced. I am not really seeing that much difference when it comes to our visual quality going for balanced as opposed to minimum. So that really leads me to believe, you know, you may as well just go for the medium preset, or the minimum preset rather, and, you know, get, even if it's not much, just get a bit more. Though these settings are resulting in really, really high FPS, as you can see, really, really solid 1% lows. Really across the board, this game does seem to perform really well when it comes to our 1% lows. You know, like I said, it is a very mature game engine, and Call of Duty series have been around a long time, so it shouldn't be super surprising. I'd hope that, you know, by now they would have, you know, figured out how to get consistent frame times, but it is nice to see that, you know, it is resulting in, really across all of our tests here, is resulting in really, really solid FPS and really good 1% lows. Really, really smooth experience. And now moving up to 4K here. So this is the last resolution that we're going to be testing, and I do just want to test to see what we can get here playing at 4K. Native FSR. Now, FSR for our anti-aliasing is certainly not necessary when we're going all the way up to 4K. So I will go ahead and we will also just test, you know, a less intensive form of anti-aliasing. But just due to the fact that I tested this at our other settings, I figured may as well test it here. So max possible settings here at 4K native FSR. All right, so again, this is at 4K max settings, and while this isn't a competitive FPS, it is nice to see and pretty, you know, somewhat impressive that we can come in here and play at 4K max settings at native resolution using very, very intensive anti-aliasing, or relatively intensive anti-aliasing, and get a 60 plus FPS experience. Now, on PC, you know, 60 FPS is typically okay, but on PC in a competitive game like this is certainly where, you know, kind of stops being okay. I will say that it is interesting to note, and I have been keeping an eye on our video memory, even though I haven't been calling it out. Our video memory seems to be sitting right around 13 gigabytes, regardless of our settings or upscaling options. So it is nice to see, you know, 13 gigabytes certainly puts us under our 16 gigabytes that we have on the card. And to show, you know, I was showing the shadows in our previous testing. This is what the shadows are supposed to look like. Obviously, it looks much, much better here at max settings or on these extreme settings. So definitely, you are getting better looking visuals here. So definitely nice to see that not only are we getting 60 plus FPS, 71 on our average, but our 1% lows are actually still really solid too, 54. So just about 15 FPS beneath our average for our 1% lows. So you can see, still able to perform just the same. Now for a PC gamer, I would say 60 FPS for a game like this is probably unacceptable. Or at least not really what most PC gamers who are playing FPSs are probably going for. So while it is nice, okay, the second time I've done that, it is nice that we are getting, 60 plus FPS. It is acceptable, certainly, if you were playing just the single player or campaign of this game, you can, throw on these settings and probably get very, very similar performance to what we're seeing here in multiplayer. It is nice to see that this is an option. Now, certainly when we're talking about 4K, this is really where FSR 4 becomes really handy. Now, before we do FSR 4, let's actually just go for the option of just turning off our upscaling completely. And I guess I'm curious, normally anti-aliasing is in that option. However, it doesn't look like we actually have TAA, unfortunately. So let's just see how this looks. And this does look like this automatically applied some sort of dynamic resolution, which we do not want, or not dynamic, but it looks like it is automatically setting our render resolution. So we don't want that. We just want to play at 100% resolution scale. So this is just complete, native resolution here with no upscaling whatsoever. I'm not sure if there is by default, a version of anti-aliasing applied. We'll look at some sharp edges, see if we could tell if there is some kind of weirdness. It does look like maybe there is by default some sort of anti-aliasing applied. As you can see, like these phone lines, things like that. That would typically, if there's absolutely no anti-aliasing, that would typically result in, even at 4K, these small lines would result in some sort of stutter stepping. But here I'm imagining that this is probably using TAA, or, it's normally either TAA or FXAA, or in some rare cases SMAA for our anti-aliasing. But here you can see, you can play still at native 4K. You really don't need FSR for native for our anti-aliasing when we're talking about 4K. The image still looks really sharp, and as you can see, I'm not sure if it is using TAA, but regardless, the image here at native does look incredibly sharp, and this does now give us well above 60 FPS, and we are now getting natively that, kind of, again, no strict rule, but I kind of just personally typically view anything above 120 FPS average to be a competitive setting, and we are now getting 120 FPS here at native 4K max settings, which is really, really nice to see. But really what I would like to see, given the fact that we have FSR 4 available, is if we do throw on FSR 4, and let's actually just go all the way down to Balanced to begin with and see how this treats us. This kind of way to get, FSR 4 to be our anti-aliasing option and also do a bit of upscaling. So not only is it going to give us slightly higher FPS than we would typically see otherwise, it's also going to, have the added benefit of giving us a pretty mature and advanced looking anti-aliasing solution. So no jaggies whatsoever, although even with upscaling completely off, I wasn't really seeing any sort of jagged edges. So I imagine there is some sort of TAA or some, incredibly lightweight anti-aliasing option that is applied by default. It doesn't actually look like it lets you turn off anti-aliasing completely, which is not super unusual. That's pretty common nowadays for games to really not want you to really, see what the game looks like at, no anti-aliasing. Looks typically pretty terrible. But this is definitely another option. And certainly if you're playing at 4K, one that I would recommend going for is just, using FSR for, a bit of upscaling. Even if you are happy with the performance, you're able to kind of use a bit of upscaling and kind of resolve the image in a little bit cleaner of a method, using just even a slight bit of FSR. So again, given the fact that we are on FSR 4, this is definitely where something like ultra performance may be a consideration. So this is now going to give us a pretty significant FPS increase, now seeing around 160 FPS. And even though we're using ultra performance, this is one of the areas where something like FSR 4 really gives us some pretty big advantages. So typically, ultra performance on older FSR models like FSR 3, typically that looks pretty bad. Here at 4K and using FSR 4 does look really, really solid. So it doesn't look quite as clear as native 4K, obviously, but it does look pretty good. And on a 4K monitor like I'm playing on here, I would really have no issue whatsoever with playing on these particular settings. All right, and last setting I want to test here is if you just want to play at 4K, but you didn't care about the visuals, go for the minimum preset here. And again, you could go for native. However, I'm going to start off actually now on quality. Here at 4K, there's not really a great reason, or really any reason, to go for FSR 4 at native. You're going to be sacrificing a lot of performance to play at like this really, really aggressive and advanced anti-aliasing solution that you don't really need at 4K. So this is FSR 4 quality minimum preset. Let's see what we get here. All right, now here at the minimum preset, which we can see, one way to definitely see that is seeing our shadows here. So minimum preset quality upscaling, you can see this is definitely another way to reclaim a bit of that FPS. Now we're seeing just about 130, 140 FPS on our average, 114 for our 1% lows, certainly giving our video memory a major break here. So this is another option for you if you didn't really care so much about visuals, just wanted a good looking 4K picture, but you wanted to maximize your FPS that you were getting. Is another option here. Now honestly, there's not a huge FPS increase from when we were playing even at max settings, so I probably wouldn't opt for this preset personally, especially at 4K. Those things where maybe you could have not noticed them or weren't really as evident at lower resolutions. Typically if you're playing at 4K, you're playing on a larger monitor, and obviously you're at a higher resolution, so some of those issues will become definitely more and more apparent. But if you just wanted higher FPS playing at 4K, this is definitely an option. Obviously 1% low is still looking great at around 100, averaging right about 140, so this is definitely an option here. Now let's go ahead and, just for the heck of it, because we did see that going for ultra performance did result in pretty good looking picture, let's go for ultra performance here. So this is really going to be the maximum possible FPS that you're going to see at 4K, using every trick that we have aside from frame generation, which I'm taking a stand against frame generation for this particular benchmark. I do think frame generation definitely has a place, but that place in my opinion is not competitive FPS shooters. But it's just my opinion. I would much rather go for more aggressive upscaling, and given the fact that we have FSR 4, in my opinion, not a great reason to use frame generation to achieve a higher FPS. When you can see ultra performance here, now we're seeing 200 FPS. To me, that's totally fine. I don't think artificially, getting all the way up to whatever ends up being, 300 FPS, 350 FPS, I don't think it is worth the added input latency. I think that is a terrible decision to make personally in a competitive game like this. But again, what do I know? I am definitely not an FPS professional or anything like that. But here you can see, if you just wanted maximum possible FPS at 4K, can get around 200 here using ultra performance at minimum settings. And you know what, just for the heck of it, even though I just said I'm not going to test it, let's just go ahead and throw on the frame generation as well. So we'll go ahead and apply that frame generation, and this does get us, again, a bit more closer to 300 FPS. And I will say, given the fact that we are at a high FPS to begin with without the frame generation, the input latency is not super terrible, but really, in my opinion, I just don't want to be in the position where I am even have even the slightest thought that, okay, maybe I would have won that gunfight if not for frame generation, the added little bit of input latency. I just don't want that personally to be a consideration when we're playing a game like this. I die enough as it is by my own mistakes. I don't need, frame generation or add a bit of input latency to, have to blame for even more deaths. But hey, if you just wanted, smoothest possible FPS and that wasn't a thought to you, or you didn't really care so much, that is certainly an option that you have available to you. Anyways, guys, that's been it. Call of Duty Black Ops 7 beta using the RX 9070 XT. Game is incredibly lightweight, well optimized, and has support for FSR 4. Great frame times across the board, tons of options. The only real complaint I have is I wish that, some things were not so affected by the lower graphics presets. I would like, you know, some of these shadows. This is just a little bit aggressive for even a minimum preset for these shadows to be rendering in such a way, as well as our textures. But I do think, you know, games like this that are so, you know, popular, they do want to make them, you know, have options that are as lightweight to people as possible. So while I don't personally, oh, that was nice. While I don't personally love how it looks just from a perspective of wanting to get more FPS, of course, you know, you have options. You know, if you were, you know, certain things bothered you, you know, say, for example, I wanted to play at a lower preset just to get, you know, higher FPS, but maybe I wanted, you know, better looking shadows. You know, go ahead and bump shadows up to high, and maybe textures too. You know, I'm okay with, you know, using a little bit of our system to generate better textures and shadows. You can do that, come in and kind of tweak things, and as you can see, still get incredibly high FPS. So there are certainly options if you did want to come in and tweak things, but as far as the presets go, I wish that maybe the lower graphics presets had a bit more variance as far as, you know, some of the things that maybe just personally bother me, like textures and shadows. But regardless, game looks great, performs well, and you know, your hardware, if you have a 9070 XT, you're going to be having a really great time, and you have a lot of options to kind of get the performance that you want at the resolution that you want, and you know, you shouldn't really be having any trouble whatsoever. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye.